Hello, hello, testing one, two, three. Alrighty, we are recording. That is great. Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. So, I've recently been writing a lot of Rust again in the last couple weeks, and I thought that I'd make a tutorial because I recently used Actix Web in a hackathon that I did at Georgia Tech and I actually won in one of the competitions. We had to design the best use case for voice AI, and my team ended up winning, and that was really fun. And I thought, man, I want to get back into some Rust. And I also haven't made a video on this channel in like 8 or 9 months. So I've been slacking. I'm sorry about that, guys. But I just like to do this in my free time, honestly. And so I thought, I'd go to make a tutorial on my favorite Rust framework, which is Actix Web. And it's sort of basically just a framework for making an HTTP server at its core. And it provides a lot of great utilities and macros and traits for doing that. So if you're interested in Actix or you're just interested in Rust and want to learn more about this framework, then this will be the tutorial for you. And it's pretty much going to be for beginners. I'm going to assume that you know the basics of Rust at least, like macros and traits and borrowing and ownership and that kind of stuff. I'm not going to be explaining it like, line by line every single time. But if you guys do want to learn more about Rust in general, then I'd recommend watching a different tutorial first and then coming back to this so you can fully understand everything. And then there's also Actix web examples in their GitHub. So I would definitely recommend checking out that after you watch this tutorial, just to learn more for yourself and, dive deeper. I will be covering most of the documentation on their website, but not everything. So I would recommend coming here as a reference to have things explained in greater detail if you want. So yeah, and I also have all the code that I'll be showing on my GitHub at this repository, which will be in the description. So feel free to come here as well if you want to copy the code yourself, if you like to follow along while you watch tutorials. And so the application that I'm using to demo this sort of framework is called Connect. It's literally just something random I came up with. Um, and it's really just to showcase the primitives in action, like creating accounts or, databases, authentication. It's not really meant to be something real. So you can see that all of this data though is actually being processed from SQLite, and there is no real client-side framework here. I'm using HTML with some HTMX sprinkled in for some interactivity. For example, when I click login, it's going to log me in with GitHub, and then I can log out. I also have access to now edit and delete members. So if I create a new account real quick, welcome, your account has been created. I can edit the name. So we'll just say test2, and then we'll keep the email the same. And you can see that it updates. So that's the point of HTMX in here, just to give it some interactivity so that things, reload and refresh. And then I can log out, and everything else though is being in the server side Rust code, which we'll get to. So the chapters that we'll be going over this is the chapter 1, basic setup and introduction to Actix Web. Then we'll be covering routing, and then we'll do extractors and state management. We'll do static content rendering, which is what you're seeing right here. We'll do some authentication, integration, some middleware, and the different types of middleware and how they work in detail. Because that's personally like the thing that confused me a little bit about Actix Web. The middleware is a bit different. And then also how to integrate a database, which is really simpler than you think, and some error handling practices, and then some general best practices to wrap up the tutorial. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started though. So this is the current running demo actually, and I've just leaked my EUV file, which is so nice. Don't worry though, these will be deleted by the time you're watching this video. So I'm going to go ahead and reset this to a blank state so we can get started. Okay, so now that we have a blank state in our project, what we can do is really just follow the getting started and the Actix web documentation. And we're basically going to create a new cargo project and add Actix web as our dependency. And so let's go ahead and do that right now. So I'm going to open a new terminal, and I'm going to do cargo init. This will create a new project for us. And then we can go to the TOML file, and in the dependencies, paste in the current latest Actix version, which is 4.12. as the time of recording. If your version is different, that should be okay as long as you're on version 4. If you're on version 5 of Actix, there might be some breaking changes, but we're just going to go with 4. Also, I used Rushed Edition 2021 in the demo when I built it yesterday. I don't know why, because Cargo was recommending me 2021 and now it's doing 2025. So I'm just gonna roll with that just so like things match up. But you should stick with 2024 because that's the latest edition, and there's not really any advanced Rust code that we're gonna cover, so it shouldn't really break anything. But if something does happen, leave a question in the comments and I would try to help. So yeah, let's go ahead and get the Hello World server running now. So we're gonna paste in this code right here. And basically what's going on, if you're not familiar with Rust, is we have an async function and we are passing this to a HTTP server handler. And so we're creating a new Actix app, which if you hover over, you can see this is a top level builder for the Actix web application. We're creating a new one, a new instance of it, and then we're passing a route, which we're doing slash web is a helper to get the get route. And so basically what's happening here is we're telling Actix that this function is going to, so anytime a request is sent to the slash, root route, and it's of type get, then we're going to call this function. And one important thing to know about Actix Web is it uses something called a responder trait, which by definition it says it can convert a type to a valid HTTP response. And what this means is that you can see right here, we're returning a string from this function, and a string by default is not valid HTTP. However, because we're using this trait, it's going to do that automatically in the return type of this function, which is pretty cool. However, we're not really going to use this during the tutorial because it's just not very practical. Um, and as you can see in the demo that I showed you guys, we're going to be using a lot more than strings. However, it's just important to know what this responder trait does. So it's just literally an HTTP response trait. And yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know really to get started with Actix Web. I guess the other thing is like the HTTP server, this bind sort of tells it what domain and what port to spin up the server on, so you can change this to whatever you want. Calling .run and .await basically tells Rust that this is a future and we're going to run this and await some current data. Also, this Actix Web main is sort of a wrapper around Tokyo main, which makes Rust run in async mode, and it also spins up threads. And you'll see it'll be a little easier to tell later on in the video chapters what's going on here once we introduce logging. But basically, this allows our app to run in multi-threaded mode. And by default, Actix Web spins up a thread per core on your machine. So I'm using a M4 MacBook Pro, so I'm pretty sure I have like 10 cores or something, I think. Yeah, so there'd be 10 threads started. And you can configure this, but anyways, that is going to be chapter 1, guys. Yeah, in next chapter, we're going to be exploring routing more in detail, including different HTTP methods, path parameters, and query parameters. So let's go to the next chapter.